Okay, so hello everyone and welcome to our Tarot On for 2020. The great lockdown continues. At the moment, we're sort of in the 5th or 6th week of our lockdown here in the UK. And we're doing these videos as part of the occult online order of hermits, otherwise known as OO. So our secret greeting is OO. So hello to all of the OOs that have joined us, and OOs to be and OOs in recording. Hello to you. This is the wave for those watching the recording. So today we're going to cover some of the main personages that we meet on our initiatory journey up the tree of life. And what we're going to do is discuss those. I'm going to give you a simple practical method of using the tarot based on the tree of life from the work that we've already done. But if you're after like practical beginner guides to tarot, you'll need to go back through the previous 40 videos, and particularly the ones highlighted in the unit section as for beginners. At the moment, sessions 40 to 50, we're covering the Tree of Life Initiatory Tarot, and so it's more conceptual and to do with the spiritual journey as far as it's mapped by tarot and Western esotericism. So we are not covering practical readings just through this little section. We're also going to discuss in a couple of days the Tarot of the Secret Dawn. You won't have to have this deck or the booklet that comes with it, but I will be using this to demonstrate some of the methods that you can use with any tarot deck for scrying, pathworking through the Tree of Life and through the tarot. This research and this deck came through discovery by Derek Bain in the actual archives of the Golden Dawn, the original Golden Dawn, and it features artwork by Janine Hall and research by Tali Goodwin and text by myself as well, come together in a little project on esoteric tarot. And this tarot was actually hidden in text description in the archives of the Golden Dawn for 100 years as well, before it was recreated by the artwork of Janine Hall. So I'll be using that in a few days' time, and we'll be discussing how we can dive deeper into the tarot as a landscape. I was just distracted by scrolling down the left-hand side so I could see everyone's comments. Thank you. The Zohar 5-book series, they are a set of the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, and they are fairly fundamental in our understanding of Kabbalah from the Judaic tradition. However, if you're going straight into Western esotericism through Kabbalah, it's not as essential as something like the Sefer Yetzirah. The Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation, is a very small piece of text, but that really formulates Kabbalah as it's used in Western esotericism, whereas the Zohar is far more of a rabbinical study for Jewish scholars and mystics. It is, I've got 2 versions of the translated Zohar myself, and I dip into it from time to time, but I wouldn't say it was a primary source for Western esotericism, if that answers Marcy's question. So today we're going to cover a few of the main signposts along the Tree of Life, because we've discussed the journey up to about here. Tomorrow I'm going to discuss what Dion Fortune said about Deborah and Hayset, and a little bit more about the grades of Adeptus Major and Adeptus Exemptus. you'll already realize from the tree of life that we've covered that you can guess that the Adeptus Major is basically a souped-up version of the Practicus in terms of magical, practical work. The Adeptus Major has to soup up his practical work on this pillar, and on this side, the Adeptus Exemptus is a more superpowered, mystical version of the Philosophus. So all of the contemplative and devotional work done here is taken to a new level up here, because these Sephiroth build up, they're all lower layers and higher layers of each other, as we can see on the diagram. So I'll give you the practical technique first, and then I'll talk about the dweller on the threshold. We're going to talk about that. I'm going to read a little bit about that from some of the texts that I've written already, so I don't forget anything. Excuse me. So the dweller on the threshold, and the holy guardian angel, the Qlippoth, and Chronozon, the demon of the abyss. So we're going to cover some quite serious and heavy stuff today. And even though I'm going to cover it briefly and lightly, I would say that what I'm going to talk about are very foundational and fundamental aspects of experiential mysticism, and are not to be taken lightly. I'll discuss them fairly lightly and fairly accessibly, I hope, but these are fairly fundamental aspects of Western esoteric thought and real experiences that, in the words of Clive Barker and Hellraiser, can tear your soul apart. And so they are not light things in themselves, but I did want to point them out on the tree so that when you encounter these things in your reading, in your studies, and even in your experience, then you'll sort of roughly know where they might exist on our map, okay, so that they don't come as absolute surprises. I just wanted to give a shout out to Christopher Cairns. He's one of the members of the association. This is not a promo for his book. It's just that I ordered it and received it today. And it's a really delightful book of very accessible poetry on each of the cards going through the Fool's Journey. And it's really delightful. It's a delightful journey through the tarot in verse form, very simple, accessible verse, but really nice, capturing the nature of the cards. It's a very light journey through the whole tarot deck. Ideal for beginners. This would be absolutely brilliant for beginners. So Christopher should be very proud of what he's produced in this book, because I think it's his first publication of his own writing and stuff. So it's just really nice. It's like really refreshing and really nice to get something like this. And it's like, oh, that's really nice. That is really nice. So thanks to Christopher for writing that and taking the step to publish it as well. Okay. Right, our practical method though comes from Tarosophy today. So that's what I'm going to read from. Are we losing traction on the internet? I have to say my screen keeps flashing and things like that. I really don't know what goes on with the internet these days. So I wanted to actually, there were two things that I wanted to point out today. One is in Tarosophy, there is a little section that's quite important called Learning the Correspondences. And this one is called Tarosophy, by myself. That's me. That's my name. So This exercise 32, you'll now realize why it's called exercise 32, because you've been in on my wacky Kabbalistic sense of humor for 44 sessions. So exercise 32, which is the number of Sephiroth and paths, learning the correspondences. So what I've listed here is the order in which to learn the correspondences on the Tree of Life. It's very important to learn the names of the Sephiroth on the Tree of Life, learn the Hebrew letters, then learn the values of the Hebrew letters, and then learn the correspondences to the tarot for those letters, and then learn the other correspondences, for example, the planets, the elements, the zodiacal symbols, and so forth. Okay, there's a good order to do it in, which is not necessarily the order that it's given in a lot of books, but why that is important is because then you can build practical methods quickly on top of your learning, because I don't like to give out abstract learning when it doesn't really have any practical purpose in real life at some point or another, or unless it's a building block for later experience when that learning makes sense. Yeah, so what I'll do is I might scan these in, and I might auction off the notes for charity when we're done with all of this, as a sort of reminder of what we all lived through during this time. Okay, so if you learn the spelling of the Sephiroth, first of all, so you know that this is Kether, you know that it is spelled Kaf Tau Resh, and that you know that that is the wheel, the universe, and the sun tarot cards, then you can start to do things with this. And we've seen in a previous video, several videos back, that we can build a machine out of our tarot cards for seeing what the Sephiroth actually are based on those cards. Okay, but we can do something else, which is the practical method for today, before I go on to the more abstract map. And it's in Tarosophy, but I thought I'd dig it out again. If we take, for example, we have the letters spelling of the Sephiroth here. So if I go to Hesed, for example, that's a quick one because it's only got 3 letters in it. So Hesed, meaning mercy or love, is Cheth, Samek, Daleth. Okay. Now, not only can we see those as the Chariot, Temperance, and the Empress tarot. The Chariot, Temperance, and the Empress as explaining what love is. So the Chariot is the empty soul. Samek is temperance, and Daleth is union. So love is composed of emptying your soul to equilibrate in perfect alchemy and art the union of 2 souls, okay, or the union of souls in Daleth, which is the Empress or Venus. So Hesed spelt Cheth, Samek, Daleth. When you know the correspondences to the Chariot, Temperance, and the Empress, that reminds you what love is. Love is actually illustrated by the Chariot, the mystical aspect of the Chariot as holding the Grail. Temperance, particularly the alchemical version or the art version. If you look in the Thoth Tarot, you'll see these very clearly. And then the union, the creative or procreative union of the Empress. Okay. And indeed, as Adela is saying, the Hebrew words have 3 letters. Those are called the mother letters of Aleph, Mem, and Shin. and sometimes Tau is added to those, and that is the Fool, the Last Judgment, and the Hangman. The Fool being Aleph, the Hangman being Mem, and the Last Judgment being Shin. And those are known as the mother letters, or the three mother letters, sometimes with Tau as Earth and the world. But knowing that is a very good way of illustrating what Hayset is, because you already know it from your tarot cards. So just looking at this table, you can actually then, okay, am I cutting out for everyone? As Shaheen is saying, I'm cutting out, but I'm not sure if that is for everyone or just randomly. Hopefully the recording will be okay. And if it's the video or the sound, if people can let me know, then we can see if we... Unfortunately, we can't really do anything about it. The internet is what it is. So what we can then do is actually use this as a practical method. And this is what I want to cover today. So if we wanted to do a reading about love, then we could lay out the Chariot card, the Temperance card, and the Empress, and use those as positions in a spread. Use them as positions in a spread. Okay, so the Chariot would be, where is this relationship taking me? Temperance is, how can I best relate in this relationship? And the Empress would be, what can come of this relationship? How about that? So that would get to the core, most important things of a relationship as spread. And then you can actually lay cards on top of those cards to do a 3-card reading. And what that means is you can then use any Hebrew word for any English word to develop your own spread. Okay? So if, for example, there was a spread where I wanted to understand what the core nature of truth was in a particular situation, I could actually look up the Hebrew word for truth, which is, I think that's Ameth, actually. I think I know that one. Aleph Mem Tau, and that would be the Fool, the Hangman, and the World. And then I could use those as positions in a spread. So the Fool would be, what freedom does truth give? The Hangman would be, what do I need to sacrifice to gain truth? And the World would be, how can I live truth? Okay? And then you could shuffle your whole deck and lay them out on those 3 cards. And that would be a reading of truth, of the nature of truth, based on the 3 tarot cards that correspond to the spelling in Hebrew of the word truth. Isn't that cool? So you can actually make a method, I think is what I'm saying, out of the conceptual building blocks that we're learning, in the same way that we did the ritual yesterday. So we can take it a little bit further all the time, bringing it down to the bottom of the tree of life to actually have a method involved. Make sense? So you just need a Hebrew dictionary, but of course, if you're studying Tarosophy, then you'll have a Hebrew dictionary anyway, of course. Okay, so that was the practical method. I hope that is of interest and you can try it out with different words, even your own name in Hebrew. You can lay out a spread based on that as well. Why Hebrew? It's just Hebrew, okay? Let's leave it at that for the moment. I could go into a long rant about why Hebrew is a specifically magical language through correspondence, but is the place for it. If you're studying Kabbalah, then you have to accept that Hebrew is something that you are going to be working with. So I'm now going to introduce some of our waymarks on the tree of life. First of all, we have the dweller on the threshold. Then we have the holy guardian angel. And then we have Chronozon, and we also have the Qlippoth. And these are all fundamental aspects of the tree of life predicated by its nature. And again, these things arise because of the model, They're necessary parts in the same way that if you have a braking system on a wheel, you have noise and you have heat and you have friction. All of these things are part of that system. In the same way that the Qlippoth, Chronozon, the holy guardian angel, and the dweller on the threshold arise from our system and from nature. We observe these. So I'm going to start with the dweller on the threshold, and I put in brackets an S because the dweller on the threshold appears all the way up through the tree of life. I'm reminded of a story that, well, I say a story, it's a true story. But our teacher told us a bit of a story in the sense of we had a chemistry lesson and we were told that one of our groups would get a higher mark for accurately measuring the boiling point of water. And of course, we knew it was 100 centigrade. And we set up the apparatus according to the instructions, and we had a stopwatch, and someone was watching the thermometer very closely, and someone was recording it, and someone was playing with a Bunsen burner to heat it up. And of course, what we all got was a graph, because we had to graph it, and the marks were for the most accurate graph was temperature and time. Okay, so temperature and time. And all of our graphs, when after 30 seconds, the temperature was like so. After 35 seconds, it was like so. After 40 seconds, oh, we missed a few seconds, but 47 seconds, and so on. And we got what looked to be quite a straight line. And we measured it as it went up towards 100, and then we got one measurement wrong, and then it went up to 100. So that's 100 degrees, and then of course it started bubbling, and we had to take the thermometer out, and that was the marker point for getting to 100. Now the thing is that some of us corrected our graph. We thought that this little dot here was too low, we must have misread it because it was a perfectly straight line. But the actual graph goes like that. Just before it reaches boiling point, there is a very small dip. And some of us cheated. We tried to make our line straight, and of course we lost. And that was the story, the point of the what the teacher was doing with us. But for those of us who kept our little point there, that was the accurate graph. And the reason is in chemistry, when the molecules are bonded together in water and you heat them up, and they start to weaken, and they weaken generally, but then in order to transform into steam, to go into the gaseous state from the liquid state, just before that moment, just before 100 degrees, before that transformational moment, the molecules have to like steal a bit of the heat and then bring it inside in order to break apart. And that's what accounts for that strange dip. The thermometer doesn't pick it up because the heat is just shaking the molecules in effect. It's accelerating their movement. But then just a moment before the transitional state, they take a bit of the heat in order to break apart and transform from one material or one state into another. They transform from water, a liquid, to a gas. And as John's saying, it's a state change. And there is a moment of energy that is different just before that state change. And if you study not chaos theory, but it's called something like the collapsing wave, like a waveform. It'll come back to me in a moment. But there's a way of graphing that's a waveform that actually then falls. Catastrophe cusps, that's what it's called. So catastrophe theory has a similar to graph where the wave builds up and then it just tips and folds and falls. Now that is manifest in the initiatory system by the dweller on the threshold. And I just wanted to read out, this is a small section, one of the explanatory sections in a book I wrote called After the Angel, which was my diary for the Abramelin operation, which is to do with the Holy Guardian Angel. But I wanted to explain a few of the things that I encountered during that time. So I put these little footnote type things in the book, which is basically my journal of the time, with all of my notes from my actual diaries, but then I wanted to put in explanations. And this is my explanation. Well, it's actually, I've stolen it from Alice Bailey, I think it's Alice Bailey, of the dweller on the threshold. So if you'd just like to bear with me, I'm going to read this thing. I'd put, the dweller on the threshold is a configuration of energies which arise prior to a significant state change. These often constellate as a terrifying figure of alien malignity, or even a series of accidents and misfortune. A lot of people working with initiation, working with magic, quite often encounter strange runs of really challenging ill fortune, bad luck, and nightmarish type encounters. And basically this is that state change just before the state change. It's one energy transition that happens just before you release into the next stage. Now, listen to what Alice Bailey said in one of her books on theosophy. She said, there emerges from individual past lives and experience that which is the sum total of all instinctual tendencies, of all inherited glamours, and of all phases of wrong mental attitudes. To these, as they constitute a blended whole, we give the name of the dweller on the threshold. This dweller is the sum total of all the personality characteristics which have remained unconquered and unsubtle, and which must be finally overcome before initiation can be taken. How about that? And then I've just basically repeated my thing about the brief drop in temperature, the heat energy, and I got, this is the pre-initiation wibble. Rigarde called it a mental breakdown in preparation for the new state. And that is basically what the dweller on the threshold is. It's a personification of all of the unstable and unredeemed and unintegrated aspects of the self's relationship to the universe that haven't been integrated. And what happens is if you are pushing to change your state, you have to push through and break those bonds, break those attachments. It's what everyone says in every mystical tradition, that you must become non-attached. But because we have attached ourselves to so many things, including our own sense of being a person, our identity, those bonds, when they break, have to have a lot of external energy. And it draws that from all of our relationship to the universe. So if you have light bulbs bursting, you have shopping trolleys knock you over, if you have bad dreams and you're pushing through during an initiatory stage, then quite often those constellate as the dweller on the threshold. And it's a very noticeable experience. And even if people don't know about it, they still have it. I've had plenty of students over the years who have had repeatedly, prior to their initiations, that state change happen. And that is called, let me get my map, the dweller on the thresholds. Quite often, the worst one is on the path of the terrible tale when you first start off. But then there are others all the way. Now, I'm just going to move from there to our, well, actually to Chronozon, just very quickly, because Chronozon is the demon of the abyss that lives here. And if you think that these dwellers on the threshold are terrifying, then Chronozon is the biggest, baddest, and worst of them, because he embodies, or it embodies, or they embody the worst aspects of the abyss that separates normal human awareness with a divine integrated awareness. And so you can imagine that Chronozon is going to be quite a big step for the babe of the abyss to face as they go through that transition. Because basically you've got to release everything from below. Absolutely. There can be nothing of this that is taken across the abyss. So even the Holy Guardian Angel itself, your sense of individual personality, your sense of separation to the universe, any boundaries, any borders, any concepts, ideas, any emotions, any soul, any sacrifices that you've made, any skills, any knowledge, any awareness, everything has to be completely jettisoned to get through the abyss. And Chronozon is basically an abyss full of little dots, as Crowley called it, who are all going, I am I, I am I, I am I, I am I. Billions and billions of points of identity, all screaming lost in the abyss, or screaming that they exist, because this is a point of non-existence to enter the grade of Magister Templi on the other side. So it's a huge leap, but from the first moment you set off on this path, you are encountering shadows of Chronozon all the way through the journey. Does that make sense in terms of the mystical journey? And in I'll read from Bernadette Roberts in a few days, and we'll see that she called this, even though she wasn't in Kabbalah, wasn't a Western esoteric student, she was a more Catholic mystic, but she called this phase the passage. The passage. And if you replace her description of the passage for the abyss, you get exactly the same description, almost exactly. And Dafrijon as well went through a similar stage as well. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of the, you go mad if you try and hold on to anything. And that's the risk that you have to take. That's the faith that you have to make that crossing. Okay, so yeah, so I wanted to introduce a Dwell on the Threshold and Chronozon in the same light, but now the Qlippoth. Okay, so Qlippoth is a Hebrew word which means shells, and sometimes in some forms of Western magic, the Qlippoth are seen as evil in some way or another, like it's something a bit dark and dangerous. I'm working with the Qlippoth on the dark side of the tree of life. And unfortunately, when people are being like that, they're basically eaten by the Qlippoth of Yesod already, because they're using that sort of sense of working with something evil as something to aggrandize their own ego. So they're already being eaten by the Qlippoth down here, even though they say they're working with the Qlippoth of Kether or something like that. So the Qlippoth are basically the shells that form, or the waste around each of the Sephiroth. Okay, and so in the system, when we have the pure light come in here, then it goes into Hokmah, it's out of balance. If you think of water coming down a pipe, if it goes into here, it starts to fill up, but it's out of balance because there's nothing over here. And so it spills over. There's a lot of spillage that comes out here. And then it goes across here, and then it fills up. But of course, until it's filled up, it doesn't balance here. So then it spills out here, and then it pours down here, well, actually over here, and so on. So all the way as it comes down the tree, it's always out of balance, and there's always a sort of spillage. And basically, the Qlippoth are the necessary waste or spillage that hold everything together that are necessary. So the Qlippoth are like the waste products of what we're all about. And I think there's a scene in Charlie and the Glass Elevator by Roald Dahl where they go through a phase with the glass elevator where they are going through a cloud, and Willy Wonka says this is all of the what ifs and maybes that people have thought, all clouding around, that have never been manifest. And that is a little bit not like the abyss, but like the Qlippoth. Every time you have an idea or a wish or a hope that isn't fulfilled, you're making a Qlippoth. You're making a shell that then separates you from what is really happening in your life. And if you live inside those unfulfilled ambitions, then basically you're living in the shell of the Qlippoth. So you have to break through those and actually accept life as it actually is presenting itself in order to break out of the Qlippothic shell. Okay, so that is basically, and the Holy Guardian Angel is one of the key elements of the whole system that exists as a rising part of our relationship with absolute unity when we have a sense of consciousness. And most of the mysteries of the HGA are summed up by the High Priestess tarot card that goes on this path. One of the phrases that Crowley calls the Black Brothers, or the evil brethren, are people who have got this far and then allow Chronozon or the Qlippoth to really grab hold of them, and they exist in Darth, which is knowledge, and they basically become sources of knowledge, but only for themselves. And as a result, they suck everyone in like an imploding black hole into their own continual emptiness. And, basically that's Instagram. Sorry. It isn't really, but this sort of suckage of constant feeding of self-reflection is part of the nature of the Black Brothers of Darth, who constantly need to influence and have attention in order to have an existence. And that is the anti-opposite of crossing the abyss, or any part of the Tree of Life itself other than Yesod, where you can get caught into a hall of mirrors which again is that sort of selfie nature of being constantly self-reflective. We know that because the moon corresponds to Yesod, and it's on this path here as well, of going around this cycle of self-reflection and only living in your own dreams. That's the moon card here, and the moon corresponding to Yesod here. So the map usually tells you roughly where people are. In terms of the dark night of the soul, as Catherine has noted, that is seen as this crossing of the babe of the abyss. Although you can have, a bit like the dweller on the threshold, a dark night of the soul in every grade as you go up as well. In effect, if you imagine that the whole tree exists in each of the Sephiroth, so we can draw, like in Hod, another, it's not a very good one, but another tree of life inside Hod. When you enter Hod, you enter the Malkuth of Hod, and you have the same dweller on the threshold as you go in. And then you have the Kether point that you get to in Hod, and that takes you across to the next one. You enter the Malkuth of Netzach there, and then have to go through the grades sort of again within Netzach. And then in Tiferet, you have to do the whole lot all over again, which can take several years in order to see all of these from a totally new perspective. Before you start to work towards the holy guardian angel aspects that connect to the upper part of the tree. Okay, so does that all make sense as a model? As I say, I wanted to really point out some of the key experiences that you'll read about when you start to study the Western esoteric initiatory system. If you want to know a bit more about the Qlippoth, then in the Magician's Kabbalah, I've written a section on the Qlippoth towards the back of that particular book. So just for reference, it's in the Magician's Kabbalah, and I think I talk about the Qlippoth in the Magister as well. Okay. Now, I didn't really have any bedtime reading for this evening, what could I read from? Well, we were 42 minutes. I'll just read this little section from Umberto Eco. So this is in my brief bit on the Qlippoth. From Foucault's Pendulum. If you want a book to read that is entirely about Kabbalah and has been written, even the chapters are called, it starts with Kether, then Hokmah and Bina, then Umberto Eco's Foucault's Pendulum is a brilliant book. And they talk about the Qlippoth there, and they're pronounced Qlippoth in this reading of it. Or perhaps the seashells, the Qlippoth, the beginnings of ruin, were slyly waiting in ambush somewhere. Slippery folk, these Qlippoths, Belbo said, agents of the diabolical Dr. Fu Manchu. And then what happened? And then Daitavelli patiently explained, in the light of severe judgment or Gibora, also known as Pakad or terror, the Sephirah, in which, according to Isaac the Blind, evil first shows itself, the seashells acquired a real existence. Then the seashells are in our midst, Belbo said. Just look around you, Daitavelli replied. So I quite like that section from Foucault's Pendulum by Umberto Eco. The first section of Foucault's Pendulum, where he describes the actual pendulum itself hanging from a singular point and tracing a line that shows the spin of the earth, I think that's what it shows, Foucault's pendulum, is a beautiful description of the tree of life, and it's deliberately so. So if you'd like to see how a brilliant writer has incorporated Kabbalah into a story, then you can't go wrong with Foucault's Pendulum by Umberto Eco. So I hope that's given us some food for thought and placed some signposts on the tree of life for us in our initiatory journey. Tomorrow we're going to start to look back at some more practical stuff. I'm going to talk about Gibora and Hesed with some Dion fortune. Then we're going to arise into Kether with the reading of Bernadette Roberts, and then we come back through the whole journey over the next 50 sessions for the next 50 days, or not, as the case may be. Okay, thanks a lot. Bye for now. Oh, and incidentally, those doing the ritual, move your card on one every day, and please do share the photos in the Facebook group. It's nice to be reminded of what we're working towards every day with perseverance. Bye for now.